got a hard copy as well. The opposition's social services spokeswoman, Burney, joins me this afternoon. Linda, welcome.
Hello. Now,
once a person has a certificate proving that they've been vaccinated, should it make it easier for them to move around? Is that how Labor would like to see this used?
I have to say that I'm attracted to the idea of a digital passport, if you like, to vaccinations. I know there are issues around privacy that need to be considered. The other thing, of course, and you'd expect me to say this, but it's absolutely true, is when there is a proposal or legislation in front of the Parliament, we'll be looking at it very carefully. I have to say, Patricia, that the government's record in terms of digital application is really, well, it's not a good reputation in the sense of robo-debt, in the sense of information about Medicare cards being available on the black web. You'll remember that case, as well, of course, as what we saw the last time the census was supposedly going to be undertaken. So there is issues around the capacity of the government to be able to do this properly, and there are issues around privacy and issues around whether state government First Ministers think it's a good idea. I've heard some of them on the radio today, but it's important that there be the capacity for this to take place. I mean, I've downloaded the COVID app, but I don't think it's been that successful in its application.
So you're concerned about previous failures and whether they may be repeated here. So what sort of questions will you be asking of the government to ensure that this doesn't happen again? Stuart Robert was on radio with my colleague Fran Kelly this morning. He was asked a range of questions about creating a sort of robust system that can't be, of course, hacked. Are you confident, after he answered those questions, that the government will do that?
I'm not confident in anything Stuart Roberts says, which is a proven thing, but I did hear the interview that you're referring to, and the sorts of questions that Fran Kelly put to Stuart Roberts are not dissimilar to the questions that Labor would be asking about the efficacy, which is really important, about the reliability, and as you say, Patricia, about the security of that information. I mean, it's personal information, it's personal medical information that this refers to. And, you know, I have been very diligent in understanding when I can get the vaccine and what vaccine it will be. But I have to say that the digital passport has to be secure, and the issue of personal information is probably the first priority that you want to be looking at.
Given we obviously need to get high rates of vaccination to ensure that this thing works, I mean, that's the sort of theory behind vaccinations, of course, are you sympathetic to linking getting a vaccine to access to childcare or government benefits? Is that something that you think should be explored?
The Labor has not discussed those issues in any great detail, but there are certainly issues that need to be discussed. There are some people that, for whatever reason, don't believe in vaccinations, and that's their right. I do believe in vaccinations, and I think that Australia has an incredibly good track record, particularly in the First Nations community, a really good track record in terms of vaccinations. I mean, you think about it from a historical perspective. I mean, I am old enough to remember children in the school, the primary school that I went to, that had polio or had polio earlier in their life. So, I mean, enormous changes there. I was 14, I think, when rubella came out to schools, and all young women had the rubella vaccination. So it's incredibly important, but it is personal information, and whether or not having the vaccination for COVID linking it to childcare and so forth is a discussion that's worth having. But I do note, Patricia, that in many situations, unless children who are going to kindergarten, and you'll remember this as a mum, have had their vaccinations in the little blue book, then there's a question about whether or not they pose a health risk to children around smallpox or measles or whatever in that classroom, and I do think it's an important discussion.
Just finally, and changing the topic, putting your other hat on too as the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. Last week, the Collingwood Football Club, well, it didn't release its report, it was leaked, and then addressed the report. It found systemic racism in the club. Now, over the weekend, more voices have added their voice to these calls for Eddie Maguire, the president, to step down. Do you think he should step down?
I think Eddie Maguire needs to seriously consider his position. I note that he has made it clear that he wants to stay till the end of, I think, the 2021 season. And it really is a matter for the club. But there has to be an acceptance, not just from Eddie Maguire, but the whole leadership of the club. And I would hasten to say the leadership of the AFL, which I think has done some very good things in this space, to understand that systemic racism is part of Australia. It's certainly part of Australian sport, and it is part of the AFL. They are the issues that need to be examined, from Eddie Maguire through to Gil McLachlan and all of the AFL, in my view.
You say that you think Eddie Maguire needs to consider, his position now rather than staying the full year as he so far intends to. Why is he, in your view, not capable of overhauling the club's processes to address these issues around systemic racism?
Well, look, he may be capable, and as I say, Patricia, that is absolutely a matter for the club and a matter for the president of the club. But that report was a serious report. It was done by serious people. And the issue really is not about Eddie Maguire. It's about making sure that Collingwood as a whole accepts and does something about the culture of the club. But Collingwood is not the only sporting organisation that needs to consider these important questions about the way in which we want sport to be reflected in Australia. Australians look up to sport. It's an important part of Australian culture, and there is no place for racism anywhere in it.
Linda Burney, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Patricia.
Linda Burney there. She's the Shadow Minister for Families, Social Services and Indigenous Australians. Well, that's Afternoon Brief.